let's talk about the manifesto. Has anybody seen this? This has flown so much under the radar, I can't believe it. This is a manifesto. When you ever use the word manifesto, come on, what does that say to you? But this is a manifesto put together by a number of economists. And these economists say several things about the economy. The manifesto says, first, public sector borrowing is not the cause of our troubles today. It's the private sector. I know that'll resound very nicely here. Number two, we actually agree. Private sector has slashed spending and paid down debts over the last few years during the crisis. Makes sense, doesn't it? Things are slowed down, you want to do that. Third, however, government fiscal and monetary policy must take up the slack. Don't worry about government deficits. There's no problem here. Now, everybody, you can go to manifestoforeconomicsense.com. Are you all going to go and sign that? Ooh, yeah. Well, you'll note that one of the authors of this is one of our old friends, Mr. Krugman. Basically, what he's saying is a very interesting point. We have always said that in the currency market, we watch fiscal and monetary, trade policy, and so on. But the fiscal policy, you only have three choices. You can cut spending, you can raise taxes, or what's the third? You can allow your currency to depreciate and pay it back with cheaper dollars. This is out of his book, End This Depression Now. Essentially, what he is saying is suggesting that we manage inflation up 4 or 5%, and that in 5 years, the dollar will be worth about 25% less. That's simple math. And so the government can begin to service or pay this down with cheaper dollars. What a concept, eh? Depreciate your currency, depreciate your buying power, pay it back with cheaper dollars. To hell with spending, to hell with taxes. So that is essentially the great debate that's going on right now in economic policy. And we don't think about this in political terms, we think about it in currency terms because we're observers to this process. But on that manifesto side, what we'll call the Keynesian, this is stimulus side, which probably includes really both sides of the aisle, unfortunately. They say there are few structural issues in the economy, that there's simply a lack of demand. And the government proportions just fine. So why don't we just stimulate massively? That's that side of the aisle. Now on the other side, which really has very little political representation, unfortunately, maybe Gary Johnson, structural inflexibility is in place today. Government is overwhelming the economy. Fiscal policy and debt management are critically important. And that there is a moral hazard of intervention in the marketplace. No quick fix. Work it through. Slog it out. And this is really the debate that's going on in economic policy as it relates to politics today. And one of the things that we found most fascinating, here's one of the solutions that one of the analysts we read came up with. What do you think the key to happiness is in today's economy, or his suggestion? Reduce your expectations. If you want to hit a budget, lower it. Boy, that's a little shocking. And what we see really is politicians all over the world. We're the ones who can fix the economy. There isn't a politician out there today, both sides of the aisle, or all three sides if we count the Libertarian Party, that doesn't say they can't fix the economy. It shows up in both major party speeches. It shows up in Germany. It shows up in every country. But I think what they've done really is paint themselves into the corner. And unfortunately, that's the situation we are going to be able to talk about then in terms of the currency markets over the next few years. So let's set a few elements here to show you where we're going to be talking. We're going to talk about Europe first. It's the biggest topic these days. And if you look at the gross domestic product, you really see that Spain and France and Germany are all in there. Greece, Portugal, Ireland are rounding errors in a lot of sense. It's not as big as California to the U.S. It's more like a Georgia, in good solid states, but really don't make that much difference. But interestingly, even with all these troubles, the projected growth is still in the positive range for Germany, oddly for Ireland, and for France. Now you see Greece is in the tank, we all know that. But when you move that forward just a little bit to say, what's the debt to GDP ratio? People have been focused on that a lot. We say that our debt to GDP ratio is getting out of hand. We happen to agree. But something very interesting. Spain's in trouble. They're having trouble selling debt, aren't they? Spain has a 79% debt to GDP at the governmental level. It's a little bit better than the United States. Who else has 79%? Germany. Same thing, different outcomes. But as a banker, of course, you lend to people not just because of ratios, but because of their capacity to service debt. And when you look at total debt in an economy, this is substantially ignored. So the top bar for each of these countries is the year 2000, and the bottom bar is the year 2010. And you can see the growth in government debt on the left and personal and business debt on the right. And interestingly, Spain didn't really grow their government debt a lot. They're doing some things to cut back their budget deficit, have done some things this week. But look at that pickup in consumer and business debt, 283% of GDP. Germany, France, oddly, we kind of look like Germany. That's the United States right there. But the total debt burden on the country is what's going to drive its currency. It's going to drive the pricing in their bond market. And we'll give you some opportunities to invest if you keep track of this very carefully. But what does drive is that capacity to service debt. Take a look at the unemployment rate in these countries. Frankly, Spain, Portugal, Greece really don't have much to sell. They have some industry. There's shipping in Greece. There's olives. There's a little bit of stuff in Spain. But 25% unemployment is what's driving Spain's issue. And interestingly, that really came because of another set of policies. Let's go back to about 1995 and look at some of the countries in the euro and their debt on their 10-year notes, their borrowing rates. And you can see them all crashing down as all the interest rates did in the late 1990s. But then when the euro came into existence, everybody became one. Greece, Spain, Italy, Germany, France, all borrowed at that same rate, essentially, from about the year 2001 to 2007. Now, the Keynesian team will tell you, don't worry about public debt until rates rise. Well, tell me, what was different about Bear Stearns in January versus March? Did they completely change the company? Did they change the way they earned their money? It's called confidence. And when confidence is shattered, it just all goes upside down. Because at the Lehman crisis, you see what happened. Everybody woke up and said, you know what? Greece really isn't the same credit as Germany. Seems like a revelation. But people were lending the money at the same rate as Germany for all that period of time. And when you have low rates in a country, what do people do? Borrow money. Look at the trade situation in those countries. Germany is on the upper hand, exploding trade surplus. Spain at the bottom had an exploding trade deficit. What they were doing in Spain, Italy, and France is borrowing money super cheap as individuals and as companies and buying stuff from Germany. No wonder Germany loves the euro. They've had great GDP growth all this time. But this is the thing that actually saddled Spain and the southern European states with all the problems they have. So what are our current conclusions about Europe? It's going to be difficult. They're going to work it through. It could break the euro up. We don't think so today, but there may be some situations where it's just going to absolutely have to happen. A lot of bailout stress, and there's going to be multiple levels of social stress. We've already started to see it in Greece. We're going to see it in some of the other countries. What's interesting is the euro is weak, but it isn't crushed. You'd think that it'd be back at par at 90 with all this trouble. It actually hit a low. It's the headline in the Wall Street Journal today. Euro hits 2-year low. But what does that say about the US dollar, that the euro isn't crushed? What's interesting, too, is how do you actually do a breakup if it comes to be? It's got to be done in secret, because otherwise the banking system in the country that's leaving is just going to have a run on the banks. So what are the scenarios? One gone. Let's say it's Greece. Maybe the case. Maybe there's a northern bloc, kind of solid countries, Germany, France, Netherlands, some of the other northern European countries, and everybody else just goes off on their own, lets their currency depreciate. There'll likely be actual or de facto defaults. We're going to write down the debt here, and thank you very much for investing money with us, but we're writing it down. And how do you do currency printing in secret, really? Before that happens. You've got to do that. You've got to have something to hand out to people on the street, because the day that you do the conversion, the euros shouldn't be accepted. And we likely have possible bank insolvency if you don't do it in secrecy. So it's a very interesting problem, even if you wanted to start to break up the euro. And we likely require capital controls like the United States had after World War II, where you can't actually move money out of your own country. So that's a little bit about euro. Let's turn to something that's more positive, the growth rate around the rest of the world in the emerging countries. Here are the projected and historical growth rates over the last several years. Blue bar being the emerging markets, green bar being the OECD or the G10. And I think you can see which one's the winner in each of these cases, about 100% of the time on a multiple of 3. We still see, even in the declining economy, great opportunity worldwide. And one of the things that they got the memo on was debt to GDP. Australia is circled on the left, China on the right. The average debt to GDP in the emerging countries is about 35%, including some bad ones like Brazil. And of course, the United States and the Eurozone are off there to the right, leading the pack in debt to GDP. They may have actually gotten the memo right. Let's take a look at these global markets when you invest. Well, it's interesting. Off on the left there, in terms of total liabilities at the governmental level, are Spain and France and Germany, and who's way over on the right? That'd be our friends here in the United States. We think that's a big issue. And it really takes sometimes a cartoonist to put it all together. Just go to xkcd.com/980. You can look at this. It's got every detail about the U.S. economy you'll ever want to see. Little bitty type, but it expands out. Go ahead and read it. But what's interesting is our consumer balance sheet here in the United States really doesn't appear to show much risk, does it? You look at the liabilities of about $14 trillion, you got assets of about $71 trillion, decent net worth, no leverage, right? Financial assets about 69% of that. What's interesting is household net worth has fallen off about $6.8 trillion with a T since the 2007 peak. Almost all of that coming from housing. And what's the problem, of course, is that Bill Gates doesn't have a mortgage. Or if he's got a mortgage on his place up there in the Bay, if he had 100% borrowing, it's not a rounding error on his net worth. What the problem is it's concentrated in people who are just right on the bubble. And that may create some social unrest for us. And boy, haven't we done a good job of paying mortgage debt down. We had a peak a couple years ago of $10.5 trillion in outstanding mortgage debt. We have paid it down, haven't we? $9.9 trillion. Well, that's an effort. Fidelity and McKinsey have put together a study about what people need in retirement on the whole. This is a different group sitting in the audience, but think about the average or your median income individual. On average, they're 37% short to meet basic post-retirement goals. And what's interesting is almost, I can't read it from here, but something like 40% is from Social Security. That means there's no savings, no serious pension that they've arranged for themselves. Again, it's possible social unrest. And unemployment is very clear here in the United States. Over the last few years, less than high school have a huge unemployment rate. This is using the official numbers, not the ones we actually look at. High school graduate, peaked at 10%, some college, and what's interesting is bachelor's or higher never hit 5% here in the United States. This has become an intellectual economy, and we are adjusting. You talk about structural issues that are out there. We do need to adjust how we run the economy to better use the intellectual capacity we have here in the United States. And you know, so many of the people that have been studying this and looking at how to solve this financial crisis did most of their research during the Depression, right? They studied how that occurred, what the monetary policy was at the time, what the leverage ratios were, and everything else. Well, let's take a look at something that's very important. It was a different world then, guys. In 1900, 41% of the workforce was involved in agriculture. Right at the beginning of the Depression, 21%, about 7.7% of GDP. A big chunk of folks worked on the farm, right? Or in a farming community, rural community. By 1945, more or less at the end of the war, it had dropped a little bit. 1970 dropping again, but today we are in a different world. 2% of Americans are working in farming contribution businesses. It's less than 1% of our GDP. So all the models that have been written about the Depression ignore the fact that we are in a different world. So what we see again, and I've had this slide for 10 years and it's always the same. We have excess liquidity. We have a federal deficit that's out of control. We have money supply expansion. We have a balance of payment deficit, and we have bad borrowing behavior by individuals. So what do we think is going to go on in the U.S. over the next few years? First, there's going to be continued credit rationing. I think everybody knows that banks really aren't lending and nobody else is worldwide. We've already seen 3 municipalities go down in California. Be interesting to see if that takes the same course as banks did in the 2007-2008 era, where there may become hundreds of communities that actually declare bankruptcy. You know, we're big in the mortgage business. We watch that very carefully. We think at least 1 to 3 more years before the housing adjustment's over. Social unrest as some of these cutbacks come. Isn't this a cheery picture? The oddly is that the dollar is going to probably rally a little while during this time period. Chuck had called for maybe a low of the year of about 118. We're reassessing that now, but it's sort of approaching that. But after all this sort of starts to settle out, in the intermediate to long term, we think the cards are on the table for a dollar decline over the next 5 to 10 years, and that you should be preparing to hedge your portfolios to take advantage of that. But you look at currency trends, they're pretty straightforward. And in terms of total return in the market, something like gold, shown here, hasn't had a losing year. Maybe it will this year. But the S&P, my goodness, has had a 2.25% compounded annual rate of return for the last 10 years. That's just unbelievable. And then the euro, and then one of our favorites, the Australian dollar, up about 98% over the last 10 years. So as soon as this comes in, we'll go to the next. What currency should you be looking at as a possible portion of a cash portfolio? Norway. You'll be able to hear more of this afternoon at the breakout. Australia. Canada. Singapore. China. Thank you very much, and Chip's going to take me off the hook here.